Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I have left quite a large gap between the last video and this one for good reason. I wanted to gather as much information as I could about the topic of love so that I can make a series for us all that's meaningful and exciting and that we'll all want to participate in. So I want to say thank you very, very much to everybody who has commented on the last videos and also who has contacted me privately. I sincerely appreciate all your input. It was very useful and eye-opening actually. So for those of you who have listened to my previous videos, you would have heard me ask the question, what do you need to feel loved? But in fact, I think we need to ask a different question. We need to ask, what is love? And so I am going to introduce you today to a book called Love. So to continue our discussion about love, it might be a better question to ask first, what is love? If you Google it or go on YouTube, you'll find a huge array of opinions and facts, psychology and science about love. It's a difficult question because there are so many answers. So today, I want to introduce you to a book called Love by Leo Buscaglia. But before I do so, I Googled love too and checked out experts on YouTube. According to world-renowned relationship expert and founder of the Love Lab, Professor Emeritus of Psychology at the University of Washington, John Gottman, love is a kind of magic. He says you live a longer, better life if your love relationships are good. Not just romantic love either. Love with your friends and family too, and with yourself. I have a feeling he's right. Do you agree? Professor Gottman says love has a lot to do with feelings and actions. Psychological calm, trust, and commitment are what makes for great relationships. According to Professor Gottman, a mutually trustful romantic relationship makes for great intimacy. He also speaks about the idea that most people have affairs because they feel lonely in their relationships. But how do we define trust? Professor Gottman says it comes when both partners are maximizing the benefits of both people. They have their partners in their heads and are thinking about both of them, not just themselves. But the magic also comes from building commitment. At a point when things aren't going well, if you feel your partner is still the one, loyalty is built. Betrayal leads to disillusion, whereas commitment leads to loyalty. And with a sense of commitment, you have a safe place, the magic. So is there a simple answer to what is love? Yes, we are love, all of us. As I said, today I want to introduce you to a book called Love by Leo Buscaglia. According to Wikipedia, Felice Leonardo Buscaglia was born in Los Angeles in 1924. He earned 3 degrees through the University of Southern California before eventually joining the faculty. He was the first to state and promote the concept of humanity's need for hugs. 5 to survive, 8 to maintain, and 12 to thrive. While teaching at USC, Professor Buscaglia was moved by a student's suicide to contemplate human disconnectedness and the meaning of life, and he started a non-credit class he called love class. This became the basis for his first book, titled simply Love. Unfortunately, he left us in 1998 when he was 74. But what a legacy he has left. So now to the book called Love, and the tagline reads, "What love is and what it isn't." I've been listening to the audiobook narrated by Earl Nightingale, and it starts with a song, What the World Needs Now. So here's my rendition of it. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, not just for some, but for everyone. I'm sure you're familiar with this song. Professor Buscaglia starts the book with a quote from The Little Prince, when the fox speaks to the little prince who had been looking for the elusive concept called love all over the universe. The little prince probably learned most from the fox, who told him, "It is only with the heart that one sees rightly. What is essential is invisible." Perhaps you'll agree with him that love is the most essential concept for life. Yet we don't understand it, or we ignore what it really is. Professor Buscaglia goes on to regale us with definitions of love he had collected his whole life. One that stood out for me was a little boy who told him that if it wasn't for love, there would be no people. Very astute, isn't it? And then he goes on to quote from Thomas Wolfe, "Love is the ultimate expression of the will to live." Isn't that awesome? The ultimate expression of the will to live. I have a few of my own, and I adore this one by Leonard Cohen. There's a crack in everything, and that's where the light comes in. It always reminds me of the Japanese art of repairing broken vases with gold, so that the vase becomes an even more beautiful piece of art. I feel it's true of all of us who carry our scars as art in gold and inspire others to do the same, not to be ashamed of it, not to hide it. It's part of the human experience, and it's all valid and necessary for our growth, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Then there's this famous quote by Rumi, which I love. "The very centre of your heart is where life begins, the most beautiful place on earth." Isn't it lovely? And from another of my heroes, Khalil Gibran, he says, "Love gives naught but itself, and takes naught but from itself. Love possesses not, nor would it be possessed, for love is sufficient unto love." I'll conclude my short list with Plato, who theorized that love is neither beautiful nor good. Love represents the desire for the human individual to attain true pleasure and authentic happiness by achieving that which is good and beautiful. And still Plato. Love is born into every human being. It calls back the halves of our original nature together. It tries to make one out of two and heal the wound of human nature. Each of us, then, is a matching half of a human whole, and each of us is always seeking the half that matches him or her. Professor Buscaglia theorizes that we can be so much more if we dial into the enormity of the love within us. Yet, he says, we seem happy to be only a small portion of what we are. He goes on to quote a London psychiatrist, R.D. Laing, who, in his book The Politics of Experience, says, "What we think is less than what we know. What we know is less than what we love. What we love is so much less than what there is. And to this precise extent, we are much less than what we are." A thought-provoking statement, I'm sure you'll agree. I wholeheartedly agree with Professor Buscaglia that despite all we know today, we still do not celebrate the wonderful uniqueness of every individual. He further suggests that what is often ignored is the X factor, something within you, of you, that is different from every single human being, that will determine how you will project in this world. It reminds me of the grandmother of dance, Martha Graham, and her famous quote on creativity, but I feel it's applicable to us all. "There is a vitality," she said, "a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there is only one of you in all of time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium, and it will be lost. The world will not have it. It is not your business to determine how good it is, nor how valuable, nor how it compares with other expressions. It is your business to keep it yours clearly and directly, to keep the channel open. You do not even have to believe in yourself or your work. You have to keep yourself open and aware to the urges that motivate you. Keep the channel open. No artist is pleased. There is no satisfaction whatever at any time. There is only a queer divine dissatisfaction, a blessed unrest that keeps us marching and makes us more alive than the others." Such amazing words, I'm sure you'll agree, and although it's aimed at artists, I know that it absolutely makes sense as far as love is concerned too. But Professor Buscaglia suggests that we continue to try to make everyone like everyone else. For example, he mentions his astonishment that when he investigated a school, he found the art teacher was still drawing a lollipop tree on the board and expected the students to follow her example. The closer they got to her rendition of a tree, the better their marks might be. Meanwhile, the kids knew trees. They'd hugged them, climbed them, fallen out of them, and they knew trees didn't look like lollipops in nature. But they also knew the teacher would freak out if they drew their renditions of what trees really looked like. Then, to further illustrate his point, he tells the story called The Animal School. So for those of us who don't know the story, I feel compelled to tell it because it saddens me so much. The animals got together in the forest one day and decided to start a school. There was a rabbit, a bird, a squirrel, a fish, and an eel, and they formed a board of education. The rabbit insisted that running be in the curriculum. The bird insisted that flying be in the curriculum. The fish insisted that swimming be in the curriculum, and the squirrel insisted that perpendicular tree climbing be in the curriculum. They put all of these things together and wrote a curriculum guide. Then they insisted that all of the animals take all of the subjects. Although the rabbit was getting an A in running, perpendicular tree climbing was a real problem for him. He kept falling over backwards. Pretty soon he got to be sort of brain damaged, and he couldn't run anymore. He found that instead of making an A in running, he was making a C, and of course he always made an F in perpendicular climbing. The bird was really beautiful at flying, but when it came to burrowing in the ground, he couldn't do so well. He kept breaking his beak and his wings. Pretty soon, He was making a C in flying, as well as an F in burrowing, and he had a hell of a time with a perpendicular tree climbing. The moral of this story is that the person who was valedictorian of the class was a mentally challenged eel, who did everything in a halfway fashion. But the educators were all happy, because everybody was taking all of the subjects, and it was called a broad-based education. I'm sure we can all relate to this story in some way, right? I don't know about you, but I certainly wasn't good at every subject I had to take at school, and it truly saddens me that we would be so cruel to children as to expect them to do things that goes against their true selves in this way. Don't you agree? The same thing, of course, continues into higher education, where old knowledge is passed on, but encouragement is seldom given to dream greater dreams. Professor Buscaglia says that the world today for the first grader is not going to be his world in 30 years. Look at how our world has changed. No wonder we are confused and uptight and anxious. We're not prepared to deal with the world we're living in, and it's moving so fast, isn't it? Professor Buscaglia then reminds us, you can only give what you have to give. You are the best you. You will always be the second best anyone else. He suggests we're living in a culture where we're not measured by who we are or what we are, but rather by what we have. If someone has a lot, that person must be great. If someone has a little, that person must be insignificant. He tells how he sold everything he owned and went off to Asia to find himself. There he found a very different way of living and being. For example, he talks about how in Cambodia, which is mostly made up of a great lake, many people live and work around it, and it would seem these people are poor because they live in modest huts with very few possessions. So tourists going there from the West would judge them that way. But what they don't realize is that these huts are perfect for these people to live. They're comfortable and exactly right for their climate and culture, and they can cope with the monsoons that come every year to wash away everything. Therefore, they build large communal rafts, which they share with their neighbours for 6 months when the monsoons come and wash away their houses. Imagine regular monsoons where you live. What would you take on your raft with you? TVs, cars, books, clothes. In the end, you only have you. Professor Buscaglia reminds us how funny we are. For example, we created time and then became the slave of time. We use alarms and bells to help us rush around. He suggests we do the same with words. A word is just a few phonetic, meaningless symbols side by side, but we give it cognitive and emotional meaning and then we live with it. I love the quote he used by Dr. Timothy Leary when he worked on the mind when he was at Harvard. He said, "Words are a freezing of reality, and that everything that happens is filtered through this stuck, frozen system that keeps us from growing." It happens, for example, when we use labels to describe others or ourselves. We adhere to those labels and judge others and ourselves accordingly. But labels are a distancing phenomena, a contracting of ourselves and others. Professor Buscaglia tells of his life as the son of Italian immigrants and feels it was wrong of his fellow schoolmates to label him, as they knew nothing of the warmth of his wonderful family and their customs. He suggests a loving person won't stand for it. There are simply too many beautiful things about each human being to call him a name and then put him aside. He suggests if someone uses labels around you, stand up and say, "What and who are you talking about? Because I don't know any such thing." I agree with him wholeheartedly when he says, the easiest thing in the world to be is what you are, what you feel. The hardest thing to be is what other people want you to be. But that's the scene so many of us are living in. Are you really you? Or are you what other people have told you you are? It's my opinion that the things we do and express in our world is an extension of us, including the people we love. Then Dr. Buscaglia puts forward the idea of spontaneity and how important that is, as he feels we've lost our ability to be spontaneous. He feels we're all marking time. We've forgotten how to laugh and enjoy laughing. We've imposed rules on ourselves, such as men don't cry. But it's important that if you feel something, to let people know you feel it. Professor Buscaglia suggests these self-imposed rules that stifles our spontaneity, prevents us from living. I'd love to know if you agree with him. I certainly do. Of course, the pandemic had a lot to do with how we're moving away from people, and by extension, from ourselves. We're no longer touching others or getting physically close to people. But moving away emotionally seems to have happened long before the pandemic could be blamed, don't you think? Personally, I'm a hugger, and I missed it terribly during the lockdowns. But even now, with COVID still among us, I've remained more reluctant than I'd like to be to hug others. Professor Buscaglia suggests if someone hugs you, you know you must be there, or they'll go right through you. He feels we really need that affirmation and says, according to the existentialist, we all think we're invisible, that sometimes we have to commit suicide to affirm the fact that we have lived at all. Well, I agree with Professor Buscaglia. There are far better, less drastic ways of affirming it. And one of those is touching people, hugging people. Hugging may bring happiness too. Professor Buscaglia suggests a loving person is someone who sees the continual wonder and joy of being alive, and he postulates that we were meant to be happy. He reminds us there are no two things alike, no two sunsets are the same, no flowers the same, no two faces. He reminds us of another existentialist theory that says, I must be because I've done something, therefore I am. Yet we're afraid our offerings aren't good, aren't going to be approved of. We want things to be perfect. There's no such thing as perfection, because everything is changing every day. With change taking place around us every day, we are being called to live, to become. That's why, Professor Buscaglia reminds us, every day is new. Every experience is new. Every person is new. Every morning is new. So we should stop seeing it as a drag. Look at life. Look at the people you love. Listen to the rain and the wind. Professor Buscaglia quotes Herbert Otto, who said, "Change and growth take place when a person has risked himself and dares to become involved with experimenting with his own life." Isn't that wonderful? This experimenting is exhilarating, as I'm sure many of you know only too well. But it's also frightening, isn't it? Because you're dealing with the unknown, and as Professor Buscaglia reminds us, you're shaking complacency. He says he feels the opposite of love isn't hate, it's apathy. But those of you who've ever listened to Dolores Cannon would have heard her say, you are the producer, director, actor and scriptwriter in your own play. So if you don't like something, create a new play and surround yourself with new characters. Professor Buscaglia quotes Nikos Kazantzakis, who said, "You have your brush and colours, paint paradise, and in you go." He reminds us that to learn and to change and to become, we also need freedom. And he quotes Thoreau, who said, "Birds never sing in caves." We've got to be free to learn and create. He also reminds us that we all have our own way if we listen to ourselves, not to let anybody impose their way on you. He quotes from a book called Teachings According to Don Juan by Carlos Castaneda. The protagonist says, each path is only one of a million paths. Therefore, you must always keep in mind that a path is only a path. If you feel that you must now follow it, you need not stay with it under any circumstances. Any path is only a path. There is no affront to yourself or others in dropping it, if that is what your heart tells you to do. But your decision to keep on the path or leave it must be free of fear and ambition. Look at every path closely and deliberately. Try it as many times as you think necessary. Then ask yourself, and yourself alone, one question. It is this: does the path have a heart? All paths are the same. They lead nowhere. There are paths going through the brush or into the brush or under the brush. Does this path have a heart? Is the only question. If it does, then the path is good. If it doesn't, it is of no use. Professor Buscaglia adds to this by saying, if your path is love, the goal is unimportant. The process will have heart. You can only be real on your path. The hardest thing in the world is to be something you're not. He reminds us, find you, who you are, be as you are. Then you can live simply. It means not holding back anymore, not playing games. In a paper called On Public Knowledge and Personal Revelation by Zinker at the Gestalt Institute in Cleveland, he states, I only know this. I exist. I am. I'm here. I'm becoming. I make my life and no one else makes it for me. I must face my own shortcomings, mistakes, transgressions. No one can suffer my non-being as I do. But tomorrow is another day, and I must decide to leave my bed and live again. And if I fail, I don't have the comfort of blaming you, or life, or God. Now, Professor Buscaglia tells us, we are ready to share a trip into love. This trip is not meant to be a path. It is a sharing. And that's what I wish for the Love Crew Book Club to be also. A sharing. Thank you for listening and for joining me on this journey about love. If anything has resonated with you, please like, subscribe and share with friends you know might enjoy joining us as well. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below this video. So until next time, mwah!